There are stories that entertain, and then there are stories that stay with you. What you're about to witness is not just about a dog and a little girl. It's about loyalty, loss, and the unbreakable bond that holds through storm and silence. This tale from Vale Marks is more than a narrative. It's a lesson in love, courage, and hope, rising from the coldest of nights. As the old saying goes, sometimes the smallest light can lead us through the darkest places. Stay with us until the very end, because the ending will touch your heart in a way few stories ever will. The snow had fallen for what felt like days without end, blanketing the Colorado mountains in an unforgiving sea of white. Winds howled through the dense pine forest, rattling branches heavy with ice. At the edge of a long-forgotten trail, hidden beneath a blanket of snow and shadows, stood a crumbling wooden cabin. Its roof sagged under the weight of the storm, and its windows, clouded and cracked, reflected nothing but the pale gray sky above. It was a place the world had stopped remembering, a skeleton of a home now swallowed by silence. Inside, the air was thick with cold. Dust hung unmoving, and the boards beneath the walls creaked softly with every gust of wind. But the most haunting sound in the room was no sound at all, just the faint, unsteady breath of a little girl. She lay curled on a threadbare blanket in the corner, her cheeks flushed not with warmth, but with fever. Her name was Ellie, 6 years old. Her small frame barely stirred beneath the quilt of old towels and shirts Max had dragged over her. Her breaths came shallow, her eyelids fluttering as if caught between dreaming and slipping away. Her lips were cracked, her skin pale beneath the flush. She was not built for this kind of cold. Wrapped around her like a guardian was a large gray Pitbull named Max. His fur was matted and streaked with dirt. A long scar traced down his side like an old memory. His ears twitched at every unfamiliar sound outside, but his eyes never left the girl. They were wide and watchful, carrying a depth that hinted at all he had seen: loss, duty, and now helplessness. Max didn't shake from the cold. He shook from fear. He had endured pain before: training, fire, even the explosion that ended his career as a canine dog. But this, watching Ellie, seeing her slip deeper into something he couldn't stop, this was a new kind of agony. He nudged her gently with his snout, hoping for movement, for a sign. She stirred slightly, lips murmuring something unintelligible. A sigh, maybe. Or a name. The room around them was bare, except for broken furniture, and the ghost of what must have once been a warm home. Faded photographs lay scattered on the floor, curled from moisture and time. A broken rocking chair leaned toward the hearth, where a fireplace had long since gone cold. The place smelled of mold, ash, and desperation. And yet, it had become their refuge, the only thing standing between them and the wild storm outside. No one knew they were here. No one was coming. The wind screamed against the cabin walls, trying to get in. Snow had slipped through the cracks, collecting in soft drifts across the floor. Max shifted to cover more of Ellie with his body. He had already given up trying to keep himself warm. Every ounce of heat he had left, every beat of his tired heart, was for her. In the faintest light seeping through a half-boarded window, Max's breath came in small clouds. He stared at Ellie's face and blinked slowly, as if memorizing her features. Every now and then, her eyelashes trembled. He wagged his tail once, hopeful, but the motion faded into stillness. It hadn't always been like this. The cabin had once known laughter. Decades ago, it had echoed with the voices of a family, the tap of boots, the pitter-patter of a child's feet. But now, those memories felt like distant echoes, barely clinging to the old wood. In their place was silence, the kind that settled into bones and made the heart feel heavier. Max lowered his head beside Ellie's and let out a soft, muffled whine. Not loud enough to wake her, just enough to say he was still there, still trying. And that's when the questions began to press in on the scene, silent but deafening. What had brought them here? What chain of sorrow had led a once proud canine dog and a tiny, feverish girl into the jaws of winter, alone? What tragedy had stripped them of warmth, of help, of safety? Where was her mother, her family? Who had walked away, and who had stayed? Outside, the wind raged louder, as if echoing the questions Max could not ask aloud. But inside the cabin, the silence answered with a kind of grief only the abandoned know. Ellie stirred again, her fingers twitching against Max's shoulder. A whisper escaped her lips. "Grandpa." Max's ears perked. He knew that word. He had known the man she was dreaming of, and suddenly the moment sharpened, his memory snapping into place like a photograph warming by fire. But that memory, that story, would come later. For now, all that existed was the cold, the breath between life and sleep, and the bond between a broken dog and a fragile child. In the shadows of the abandoned cabin, two hearts beat against the silence. And somewhere in the stillness, just beyond the reach of the storm, something waited, a test of courage, a spark of hope, and perhaps the beginning of a story not yet lost. 1 year ago, the world had looked entirely different. The cabin had still stood then, not strong but standing. Its roof was intact and smoke would sometimes curl from its stone chimney like a ribbon reaching toward the clouds. The woods behind it would blaze with golden autumn leaves, and laughter would echo through the clearing, where an old man and a little girl spent their mornings stacking firewood or tending to the garden. And with them, always, was Max. Max hadn't always been scarred and limping. Once he was a proud canine service dog, assigned to assist Walter Turner, a retired fire captain living out his final years in the mountains he once protected. Walter, known by locals as Cap, was in his late 70s but still spry, sharp, and full of purpose. He and Max had been partners in the field years before, answering calls together, pulling survivors from collapsed buildings, tracking missing hikers, battling flames with a loyalty that few men could match. But when Walter retired, he'd fought hard to bring Max home with him, not as a tool, but as family. And so Max stayed, not as a working dog, but as Walter's shadow, his companion, his brother in arms. The bond between them was something sacred, an understanding built over years of facing death side by side. Walter never needed to speak much. Max understood the silence. Then came Ellie, 6 years old and full of questions, curiosity, and an energy that never seemed to run out. She was Walter's granddaughter, and in the final 2 years of his life, she had become the center of his world. Her parents were busy. Ellie's father, a firefighter like Walter once was, her mother managing life in the city. So Ellie often spent long stretches with her grandfather in the woods. To Max, Ellie was a spark of color and motion. She braided wildflowers into his collar, gave him new nicknames every week, Captain Max, Superdog, Mr. Woofington, and snuggled beside him on the porch swing every evening. Walter would sit beside them, coffee in hand, telling stories of blazing fires and lives saved. Ellie loved those stories, especially the ones where Max was the hero. It was a simple life, a quiet one, but it was filled with something rare, peace. Then came the fire. Late summer brought a lightning storm that lit the northern ridge ablaze. Walter heard it on the scanner, 3 campers trapped in the upper valley. No official crews could reach them in time, and so, like the firefighter he had always been, Walter loaded up his old Jeep, called Max to the seat beside him, and went. They found the campers. They saved them, but Walter didn't come back. The smoke inhalation had been too much. His heart gave out before they even made it back to the cabin. Max had stayed by his side until help arrived, whining, nudging his chest, refusing to leave until the paramedics gently carried him away. After Walter's funeral, things unraveled quickly. Ellie's father had been stationed out of state. Her mother, never fond of the mountains, took her back to the city, but grief does strange things. The loss of Walter broke something in her. Within months, she stopped leaving the apartment. She stopped working. She stopped noticing Ellie at all. Eventually, Ellie was placed in temporary care. It was meant to be short-term. But weeks turned to months. Meanwhile, Max had been sent to a retirement shelter for working dogs. They treated him well enough, fed him, gave him space to rest. But something vital had gone missing. He didn't chase toys anymore. He didn't respond to commands. He just lay by the kennel wall, eyes fixed on the horizon, waiting for a face that never came. And then one cold afternoon, Ellie was transferred to a new foster facility, the same one that housed retired and rehomed animals for therapy purposes. The goal was to help kids bond, to heal through connection. Nobody noticed when Max, quiet as ever, lifted his head the moment Ellie walked into the courtyard. Nobody saw the way his ears perked, how his tail thumped once against the ground. He rose slowly, every joint stiff, and padded forward. Ellie was sitting on a bench alone, her knees hugged to her chest, staring at the ground. But when she looked up and saw Max, everything shifted. Her eyes went wide. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. She slid off the bench and fell to her knees as Max pressed his forehead into her shoulder. She whispered one word, barely louder than the breeze. Max? The staff thought it was coincidence, a simple match, but they had no idea. Max remembered her, remembered the wildflower crowns, remembered the porch swing and the laughter. He remembered Walter. They were together for less than a week before the accident. A transport van was scheduled to take several children and dogs to a new center further north. Funding changes, staffing cuts, bureaucratic reshuffling. Max and Ellie were both on the list. It was supposed to be routine, but the weather changed faster than expected. Snow began falling mid-trip. Ice took the tires. The van slid off a back road, rolling once before coming to a crash, half buried in a snowbank. When Max woke, the driver was unconscious. The back doors had blown open, and Ellie was crying softly beneath a pile of blankets. The others were still. The radio was dead. Max didn't hesitate. With Ellie clinging to his back, Max pushed his way into the storm, away from the wreck, into the woods he somehow remembered. Instinct, memory, or something deeper guided him through the dark. Hours passed, then a day, and at last the old cabin appeared between snow-heavy trees like a ghost from the past. Max collapsed by the door. Ellie stirred, reached for the handle, and the two of them entered the only place that had ever truly felt like home. The first night in the cabin passed like a whisper in the dark, quiet, bitter, and endless. Max had used every last bit of strength he had left to carry Ellie across the snow and push through the warped wooden door. The old house groaned in protest as they entered, as if surprised to feel life between its walls again. Inside, the air was stale and biting. Dust clung to the furniture like a second skin, and the smell of damp wood mixed with the faint trace of something forgotten. Ashes, perhaps, from the days when the fireplace still burned. Max laid Ellie down in the farthest corner where the wind seemed weakest. He nudged together a pile of old rags and half-shredded blankets, forming a crude nest to cradle her small body. Her fever hadn't broken. Her skin was too warm, her breathing shallow and uneven. Her lips moved now and then, murmuring words Max couldn't understand. But he heard one word, again and again. Grandpa. Max licked her cheek gently, hoping to soothe her, but she didn't respond. Her eyes stayed closed. He sat beside her and listened. One breath, two, three, then a long pause before the next. Every gap made his heart thud with panic. He leaned his body over hers, shielding her from the draft, pushing through the broken seams of the wall. His own body ached, his injured leg throbbed in the cold, and hunger gnawed at his belly. But he didn't move. Max had one job now. One mission, one purpose: keep her alive. As the sun crept above the trees the next morning, Max knew he had to find something, anything. He nudged the door open with his snout and stepped back into the blinding white world outside. The snow had stopped falling, but the cold had sharpened. Every step sent pain shooting up his leg, but he pressed forward. He sniffed under the porch, beneath frozen logs, behind the tool shed out back. Nothing, until finally, near the old woodshed, he caught the faint scent of food. It led him to a pile of trash left long ago, half buried in snow. There, beneath a collapsed crate, was a rusted tin can, still sealed, and the frozen body of a squirrel, stiff, curled, lifeless. Max dragged both back into the house. Using his teeth and paws, he pawed open the can until the lid bent, slicing his gum in the process. The contents inside were barely edible, mushy beans, and some kind of unrecognizable stew. But it was food. Max didn't take a bite. He nudged Ellie gently, placed the open can close to her lips, and watched. She stirred, barely. Her eyes fluttered open for a second, glazed and unfocused. Her mouth moved, and Max leaned in closer. Fire. Angel. The words were a whisper, faint as breath on glass. But they hit Max with the weight of memory. Walter had once called him that. It wasn't an official title. It was a name born out of gratitude and belief. This dog, Walter used to say, he doesn't just follow orders. He brings people out of the fire. He carries the light. Now, in this frozen shadow of a home, that name lived again. Max pressed his body beside Ellie and closed his eyes. For the next few days, time lost its meaning. Max left the cabin only when absolutely necessary. He scavenged, dug through ice, fought off a raccoon near the shed for a scrap of jerky. He found an old garden spigot and clawed at the snow around it until water trickled out, cold and metallic, but clean. He brought back pine needles, dropped them in warm water, warmed by body heat, anything to help. Some of it worked. Most didn't, but Ellie lived. Each day her breaths grew more stable. Each night her skin cooled by a fraction. Max stayed at her side, waking at every sound, every twitch. When she trembled, he curled tighter around her. When she moaned in her sleep, he pressed his head to hers. He counted her breaths, the way a soldier counts seconds in a minefield, carefully, desperately, with his whole soul hanging on the next one. There were moments when he thought he might lose her. When the cabin felt too cold, when no food could be found, when her voice faded to nothing. During those hours, Max would pace the floor in circles, whining low, restless and afraid. He would scratch at the door, run to the window, then return to her side. He didn't know how to save her. He only knew he had to try, because she was all that was left, and because he had failed to save Walter. Not again. One night, as the wind picked up again and snow began falling softly outside, Ellie opened her eyes and looked directly at Max. "You didn't leave," she said, voice cracked and dry. Max leaned in closer, his tail thumping once. "You're still here," she whispered, "like Grandpa said you would be." She reached a hand toward his ear and clumsily tugged. "You're my fire angel now." Max didn't know what those words meant to a child. But something about them made the darkness feel a little less heavy. He rested his head gently on her chest and listened to the steady thrum of her heart. A sound that meant hope. A sound that meant he wasn't too late. The cabin was still broken. The storm hadn't ended. And they had no idea what waited beyond the trees. But in that moment, the silence wasn't empty. It was full of something small, but powerful. Survival, connection, the slow flicker of something starting to burn again. A fire Max had once carried through flames and wreckage, now flickering again in the chest of a little girl. And Max knew, deep in the old places of his heart, that the name Ellie had given him wasn't just a memory. It was a calling. The snow was falling again. not in heavy sheets like before, but in a quiet, relentless drift, covering the world in a pale shroud. Inside the cabin, the fire Max had managed to spark with old matches and scraps of wood was little more than dying embers. The light it gave off barely touched the corners of the room. The warmth didn't reach Ellie. She was getting worse. Max watched as she tried to swallow a sip of water from a bottle he had pushed toward her, but it only dribbled from the side of her mouth. Her eyes, once full of innocent mischief and wonder, were half closed now, unfocused and distant. Her breathing was shallow again, her small body curled in on itself. Max whined softly, nuzzling her cheek, hoping for a sign. Her lips moved, whispering something he couldn't quite hear. He wanted to believe it was his name. Or maybe Grandpa. Either way, he knew what it meant. She didn't have much time. That night, as Ellie slept fitfully in the pile of old blankets and pine needles, Max lay beside her, staring at the broken ceiling. Snowflakes drifted through a hole in the roof and melted as they landed on his back. The cold didn't matter anymore. Only one thought ran through his mind. She needed help. Now. And if he stayed, she wouldn't get it. At first light, Max stood up slowly, his body stiff from days of cold and exhaustion. He limped to the corner where he had stored scraps. Half a cracker, a squirrel bone, a frozen apple core, and nudged them gently toward Ellie. He licked her forehead once, then again. Her skin burned against his tongue. She didn't stir. Max stepped toward the door and looked back. This was the hardest moment of his life. Not the fire, not the accident, not the hunger. Leaving her, even for a chance to save her, felt like breaking something inside himself. But he knew. If he waited too long, she'd slip away. With a low, determined growl, he pushed the cabin door open and stepped into the storm. The cold hit him like a wall. Wind whipped his ears. The snow was knee-deep, hiding roots, rocks, and dangers beneath. But Max kept going. His injured hind leg, damaged long ago during his last mission, dragged slightly behind him. Every step sent jolts of pain through his side. Still, he pressed forward. Hours passed. Trees blurred into one another. Max followed old sense and instinct, looking for any sign of life. Once he caught a whiff of something. Meat, fire, humans. But it disappeared in the wind. His paws bled from the ice. His breath came in clouds, then in wheezes. At one point, he slipped, tumbling down a slope into a gully, where his body hit hard snow and hidden rock. He lay still for a moment, groaning quietly, the snow falling heavier now. The sky was already beginning to dim again. He pushed himself up. For Ellie. As darkness fell, he followed the scent of smoke, faint but real. It led him to a small clearing where an old cabin stood half-hidden behind overgrown trees. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney. A light flickered in one window. Max stumbled forward and collapsed on the porch. He didn't bark. He didn't whimper. He simply lay there, body heaving with effort, one paw stretched toward the door, as if to knock. Moments later, the door creaked open. An old man stepped out, wrapped in a thick wool coat, his silver hair tucked beneath a hunting cap. He held a lantern in one hand, a walking stick in the other. His eyes scanned the ground, then widened when he saw the Pitbull lying still in the snow. "Well, where the hell did you come from?" he murmured, voice rough but not unkind. The man knelt down and touched Max's side. The dog flinched but didn't growl. His eyes flickered open for a second, then closed again. "Easy there, boy. You're hurt bad." The man lifted Max gently, grunting with the weight. He carried him inside, laid him on a folded blanket near the fire, and began tending to the worst of the wounds. He cleaned the cuts on Max's paws, wrapped the twisted leg with cloth, and spooned water into the dog's mouth. Max drank. Not much, but enough. "You're lucky you made it, old fella," the man said, pulling off his coat. "What were you doing out in that storm?" As he worked, he noticed something, a tarnished, worn tag hanging from the dog's collar. He leaned closer, squinting in the firelight. "Property of W. Turner, Station 19. The man froze. His breath caught in his throat. For a moment, the room fell completely silent, save for the crackle of the fire. "Walter Turner," the man whispered, as if saying the name brought back decades. "Station 19. He sat back slowly, the memories flooding in like a dam had broken. 30 years ago, during a house fire in the foothills, a younger version of himself had been trapped on the second floor of a collapsing building. Smoke had filled his lungs, heat biting at his skin. And then, out of the chaos, a firefighter had burst through the flames. Behind him, a dog. That firefighter had pulled him out, saved his life. That firefighter was Walter Turner. And the dog, he realized now, had been Max. "You're his dog," the old man said aloud, awe and disbelief mingling in his voice. "You're still alive." Max stirred at the sound of Walter's name. His eyes opened weakly, and he let out a faint growl, not a warning, but a plea. The old man leaned closer. "You're not out here for no reason, are you?" Then it hit him. The injuries, the cold, the desperation in the dog's face. This wasn't a dog running away. This was a dog running to get help. The man stood, grabbed his coat, and stuffed some supplies into a satchel. "Let's go," he said, not even knowing where yet, but sure of one thing. If Max was here, someone needed saving, and he wasn't going to let Walter Turner's legacy fade into snow. The old man moved fast for someone his age, his boots crunching over snow as he followed Max through the forest. The trail was barely visible, buried beneath fresh powder and tangled underbrush. But Max knew where he was going. Even with his leg wrapped and weak, he pressed on with urgent determination, pausing only to make sure the man was still following. It wasn't until they crested a low ridge and the trees opened into a clearing that the old man saw it. A cabin, half swallowed by snow and shadows, barely standing against the weight of time. Max let out a hoarse bark, then stumbled forward, his body nearly collapsing as they reached the door. The old man didn't ask questions. He pushed the door open and was hit by a wave of still, freezing air. Then he saw her. Ellie was curled in the far corner, just as Max had left her. Her skin was pale, lips tinged with blue. She wasn't moving. "Dear God," the man whispered. He dropped to his knees beside her, checking for a pulse. It was there, but barely. Her breath came in weak, spaced-out intervals, like a candle flickering in the final moments before going out. "Stay with me, sweetheart," he muttered, already stripping off his coat and wrapping it around her tiny frame. "Stay with me." Max whined, low and desperate, pressing his nose against Ellie's cheek. "She's burning up," the man muttered, glancing around the cabin. "She's freezing and burning all at once." He spotted the old stove tucked into the corner, rusted but intact. Without hesitation, he tore open the wood bin, found a few damp logs, and struck a match. It took a few tries, but finally a small flame caught. As the fire grew, he reached into his satchel and pulled out a thermos. Unscrewing the lid, he poured a small amount of warm milk into a metal cap, gently tilting it toward Ellie's lips. "Come on, sweetheart," he whispered, trying to coax her to sip. "Just a little, just enough." Her mouth twitched. A drop touched her tongue. Another. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, her throat moved. Max watched, ears perked, body tense. He didn't move from her side, his eyes locked on hers, waiting for a sign. "She's not gone," the man said. "Not yet." He layered the blankets Max had gathered back over her, added his coat, and sat with his back against the wall, pulling her small frame into his lap. Max nestled against her other side, his warm body pressed tight, sharing every ounce of heat he had left. Outside, the snow fell harder, blanketing the world in silence. But inside that fragile wooden house, 3 hearts beat, unsteady, out of sync, but still alive. Time passed slowly. The fire crackled, the wind howled. Ellie slept, but her breathing began to steady. The color in her face, ever so slightly, began to return. The old man sat in silence, staring at the fire, one hand on Ellie's back, the other absently resting on Max's head. "I remember you," he said softly, not looking down. "It was a warehouse. Summer of '92. Collapsed roof, smoke so thick I couldn't see a foot in front of me." Max's ears twitched. "I thought I was done," the man continued, voice distant now. "And then your partner came, Walter Turner. Pulled me out like it was nothing, said he couldn't let someone burn when there was still a chance." He paused, swallowing hard. "You were with him. You were smaller then, but you were there. I remember those eyes. You looked right at me." Max blinked slowly, resting his head against Ellie's arm. "I never got to say thank you," the man murmured, "and I never thought I'd get another chance." He turned to Max, tears gathering in his tired eyes. "But you came back." "Not for me. For her." He glanced down at Ellie, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "She called you Max, didn't she? That means you're the same one. Still carrying him, even now. Still saving lives." His voice cracked. "I guess I still had a debt to pay." The cabin creaked around them. The wind shrieked outside. But inside, the fire glowed a little brighter, casting a soft light across the floor. Ellie stirred. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment. Her lips parted, and she whispered, barely audible, "Grandpa, Max." The old man froze. Max's head shot up. Ellie blinked once, then slipped back into sleep, her breathing now soft but steady, like waves on a quiet shore. The old man let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He looked at Max and gave a small, reverent nod. "You did it," he said. "You kept her alive." Max didn't respond. He simply lay back down, eyes fixed on the girl between them, his body coiled protectively around her. And that's how they stayed the rest of the night. Man, dog, and child. Bound not by blood, but by something older, something stronger. Duty, love, and the unspoken promise of a life once saved, repaid in full. The first light of dawn painted the snow in gentle hues of gold and silver. After days of nothing but darkness, wind, and endless white, the sky finally began to clear. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world that looked quiet and still, as if holding its breath. Inside the cabin, the fire was down to its final embers. The old man stirred from where he had sat all night, back against the wall, Ellie wrapped in his arms, Max curled tightly at her side. None of them had truly slept. But somehow, in that fragile balance of body heat and willpower, they had made it through. Then in the distance, a sound, not the wind, not the rustling of animals, a rhythmic chop, faint at first, then growing louder. The old man's eyes snapped open. He stood slowly, creaking joints stiff from cold and tension. He pushed open the warped door and stepped into the blinding morning light. There, slicing through the bright sky, was a rescue helicopter. Its blades cut the silence, a roar of salvation breaking through the stillness. He waved both arms above his head. Max hobbled to the doorway and let out a short bark, ears alert, tail stiff with attention. Within minutes, the chopper landed in the clearing. 2 paramedics jumped down, hurrying toward the cabin with medical packs in hand. The old man stepped aside without a word, letting them pass. One immediately knelt beside Ellie, checking vitals, while the other turned to Max and gently ran a hand over his body, eyes widening at the scarring and wrapped leg. "She's stable but dehydrated," one of them said quickly. "Let's move." They worked fast, lifting Ellie onto a stretcher, carefully tucking thermal blankets around her. Max tried to follow, but the paramedic paused, unsure. "She's his," the old man said firmly. "She's alive because of him." The medic nodded and made room. Max climbed onto the stretcher beside Ellie, pressing his head near hers. The motion made her stir. Her fingers moved slowly, then reached out. They found Max's ear, curled into the fur, like they had 100 times before. Her lips moved, cracked and faint, but the words were clear. "He found me again. Grandpa." Tears sprang instantly to the old man's eyes. He turned away, stepping out into the morning snow, blinking hard as he looked up at the sun breaking through the clouds. For the first time in days, the light was warm, soft. Not harsh or empty. "They're alive," he whispered, voice catching in his throat. "They're alive, so I could do something right." The helicopter lifted off with a roar, sending snow flying into the trees. He watched it disappear into the horizon, hands stuffed deep into the pockets of his coat, the weight of old debts and second chances heavy in his chest. At the regional hospital nearly 20 miles away, Ellie slept for almost 2 full days. She was stable now. Her fever had broken. She had IV fluids in her arm and soft cotton sheets tucked under her chin. The room was warm and bright, with a window that overlooked pine trees shimmering with snowmelt. And on the edge of her bed, unmoving except for the rise and fall of his chest, was Max. He hadn't left her side once. Nurses came and went. Doctors checked vitals. Visitors whispered and stared. But Max stayed planted, head resting near her hand, eyes only blinking when the door creaked open. On the 3rd morning, Ellie stirred. Her eyelids fluttered. Her fingers flexed weakly. Then, slowly, she opened her eyes and turned her head. "Max?" she croaked. He lifted his head instantly, ears perked. His tail thumped against the side of the bed, once, then twice. She smiled faintly and reached out. Her fingers threaded into his fur, tugging gently, just like she used to do on the porch swing a lifetime ago. Her voice was hoarse, but the words still came clear. "You found me again. Grandpa said you would." The nurse standing nearby blinked back tears. She looked down at the chart in her hand, then up at the pair, the scarred dog and the girl with a fire still flickering in her chest. In the hallway outside, the old man stood silently, watching through the glass. He didn't enter. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes red but shining. He had done what needed to be done. More importantly, they had. They'd found each other. Held on. Survived. Not just by luck, but by love. Loyalty. That unbreakable thread that tied a firefighter's legacy to his granddaughter, and the dog that had never stopped carrying it forward. The sun broke through the clouds again, casting golden light across the hospital floor. The glass window glowed, and within the room, Ellie shifted closer to Max, her cheek resting gently against his back. He closed his eyes, sighing contentedly. They were safe. They were together, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the world felt warm again. 2 months passed, slowly at first, like snow melting in early spring. The hospital days faded into memory. Ellie grew stronger with each sunrise. Her cheeks filled out again, color returning to her face. The fever was gone, and her laugh, quiet, hesitant at first, had returned. And always by her side, like a shadow that refused to let go, was Max. The dog had healed too. His limp had improved after a small surgical procedure funded by the fire department's K9 Retirement Foundation. News of his rescue had spread quietly through town, touching hearts across the county. A veterinarian had removed the worn tag from Max's old collar and replaced it with a new one, fitted with a medical chip and a clean inscription: Max, Service, Survivor. Family. They didn't call him a rescue dog anymore. They called him a rescuer. As for the old man, whose name was revealed to be Henry Dawson, a retired forest ranger with no children of his own, he was granted emergency custody of Ellie. No one had been able to reach her mother, and the courts, moved by the story and his testimony, saw in him something steady, something safe. Ellie simply called him Pop Henry now. One bright morning, as spring hinted its return with birdsong and melting frost, the three of them stood in the clearing outside the cabin, the same one that had once nearly swallowed them in snow. It looked different now. Not whole, not polished, but alive. Henry had started repairs the day after Ellie was discharged from the hospital. Max sat beside him as he fixed the roof. Ellie helped repaint the walls, choosing colors too bright for the setting, but perfect for a child learning to feel joy again. They rebuilt it not just as a home, but as something more. They called it Walter's Haven, a retirement sanctuary for working dogs, K9s who had served and survived, but were no longer fit for duty. Some came limping, some shaking from trauma, some just old and tired. But at Walter's Haven, they found warmth, food, gentle hands, and perhaps most important of all, a purpose. And their leader, their guide? Max. He walked the grounds like a quiet guardian, always watching. He greeted each newcomer with a respectful sniff, sometimes a soft growl if boundaries were crossed, but mostly with calm. Puppies from shelters too young or wild to be placed with families were brought here too, learning obedience and patience under Max's watchful eye. He tolerated their clumsiness, corrected their bad habits, and on good days, joined in their chase games through the meadow behind the cabin. Henry built bunk beds in the back room for visiting trainers. Ellie painted paw prints along the cabin's porch railings and strung wind chimes from the trees. A new sign hung above the door, carved by hand and stained in deep redwood letters. Walter's Haven, for those who've carried the flame. Local firefighters and K9 officers often stopped by. They dropped off supplies, told stories, and scratched Max behind the ears, reminding him that he was never forgotten. And in every visit, every soft, "Good boy, Max," there was a quiet understanding that this place was more than a shelter. It was a legacy. One evening, after the last of the visitors had gone and the sun dipped low behind the pine trees, Ellie sat alone on the porch with Max beside her. She was older now, not much, but enough to speak with the steady tone of someone who had seen more than most children her age. She held a small notebook in her hands. On the cover, she had written in careful, looping letters, "For Max." She cleared her throat, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "This is for you," she whispered. Max lay still, one ear tilted toward her. Ellie opened the notebook and began to read. "Dear Max, you didn't just save me. You didn't just find me in the snow or carry me through the dark. You carried something else. Something I didn't even know I had lost. You carried the fire Grandpa left behind. I remember when he used to say, "A fire can warm you, light your way, or protect you, but only if you keep it burning." And when he was gone, I thought that fire went with him. But it didn't. It lived in you, in your eyes when you wouldn't give up, in your body when it shook, but still stood, in your heart when you chose to go instead of stay, because you loved me that much. That fire burns in me now, too. Every time I help another dog find their place, every time I hold a leash or whisper, "You're safe now." Every time I look at this cabin and remember what we almost lost, I see you, Max. And I promise I'll keep the fire going. Her voice broke on the last line. She closed the notebook gently. Max didn't move, but his tail thumped twice against the wooden floorboards. Ellie smiled through her tears and leaned over, resting her head gently against his shoulder. The wind stirred the chimes hanging from the trees, their soft tones echoing through the clearing like laughter from another time. Inside the cabin, Henry stirred soup on the stove, humming quietly. Outside, the stars blinked on one by one. And in the middle of it all, under the roof they had rebuilt, and the name they carried forward, a girl and her dog, sat wrapped in the quiet kind of peace that only comes when a promise has been kept. The fire hadn't gone out. It had simply changed hands. If this story found its way into your heart, let it live on. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to Veil Marks. Your support helps this channel reach 1,000 souls and beyond. Every subscriber is a spark that fuels new stories, crafted with care, meaning, and emotion. As Maya Angelou once said, "They may forget what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel." And if Max and Ellie made you feel something, warmth, courage, or even tears, then this story has done its job. This isn't just a video. It's a quiet reminder. The fire never really dies. It just waits for someone to carry it forward.